Well, hello, Carl.
Michael Kitces, how's it going?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I feel like the year is just flying by. I'm a little thrown. It doesn't feel like it was that long ago that we turned the leaf into 2024, and now here we are, well into the year.
I know it's crazy. I'm having such a good time skiing in the backcountry this year that I'm like, oh no, we've only got a month and a half left. My wife, of course, is like, when is spring here? But I'm really enjoying it, but it's going so fast.
Very cool. Very cool. I wanted to jump into an interesting topic today that um came into us from Daniel, who asked what I thought was just like a really good provocative question. I don't actually know whether we're gonna be like on different sides of the fence of this or not. So we'll find out. For anyone's listening, like we really don't, rehearse these answers or anything. We just kind of
No.
lob stuff out there. So here is the question that Daniel asked. What obligation do financial planners have to open opportunities for others to become planners, giving the like industry's looming retirement cliff? What is your best case for against doing so? Right, and I've seen this cropping up from a number of folks lately. Some advisors that have said, like, "Look, I've gotten to a good place in my firm. I'm happy to create an opportunity for someone else to follow in my footsteps. Maybe it's a future successor, or maybe I don't even need that. It's just something I want to do to kind of pay it forward to the industry." And then I've seen another version of this that's like, "Hey, you profitable advisor, like if you're not hiring an associate advisor and like bringing a young person into the industry to advance us before, like you're not carrying part of your professional, like your obligation to the profession to create opportunities and career tracks in the future." And I think that's more the direction where Daniel is coming from on this. Like if do advisors have an obligation to create positions and or full on career tracks for associate advisors to give more opportunities for advisors, because otherwise we may or may not have a shortage of them, with the big old Cerulli says like 30 or 40% of us are going to retire in the next 10 years, which is a lot. So how do you think about this? Do professionals have an obligation to create career opportunities in their firms for the next generation of advisors?
Man, it's so interesting that I'm getting hung up on the word obligation. You know, 'Cause, like my sense is like obligation embedded in the word is that there's some expectation others can expect you to do that because it's like part of like you have an obligation, so I'm going to expect it. And therefore, if you don't, I am disappointed in you. And I actually have a valid reason for saying, you didn't do
Well,
part of your professional obligation. And I don't like
one,
that. Like that feels like I don't know that I signed up for that. I mean, at its, I want to be clear, at its heart, like, well, do I want to leave the industry better? Do I want to open up as many chances for as many different kind and especially for diverse voices to enter our, of course. And I sure hope all of us do. And I'm actually really gratified and optimistic about the degree to which people are doing this. And it's beautiful and lovely. Like that feels light and awesome. And then as soon as you throw in like obligation, I'm like, no, I don't think so. I don't think advisors have an obligation.
yeah,
That was the question, right?
I'll agree. Obligation is a pretty loaded word, but I do think that's the point of the question. And I have heard this crop up from more than a few advisors over the past few years of using words like obligation that I think are very, very intentionally meant in the way that you
Right.
framed the loading of the word obligation of, yeah,
Yeah.
if this is a profession and we are trying to make this a profession and see this a profession live, part of making sure it lives is that there's people who can come in to sustain it after we're gone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
You know, if I feel an obligation to leave the planet in a better place than it was when I left, before I left, like, do I have some similar obligation to my profession to say, I got to move it along so it's better when I leave than when I found it?
Yeah, I just don't love you sort of see this crop up all the time, like you're mentioning, like in different ways. And I don't love other people. I don't think I have a right to decide what other people's obligations are. And I've seen this happen recently, maybe the last 2 or 3 years, where somebody has said, like, you're not doing a thing about this thing.
Yeah.
And I happen to know the person that they're pointing fingers at. I happen to know that person is quietly doing 10 or 100x in some other area.
Hmm.
Oh, and so I'm always like, man, I don't know that it's fair to impose, like, just like with clients, we better keep our values off clients' plans.
Yeah.
I think this feels similar, and I think hopefully everybody listening knows how I feel about it. Like, of course, like, do we want to leave the profession better? But does a d- as a does a doctor, as a professional obligation, have a requirement to bring more doctors into the profession as an obligation? Is it embedded in the idea? Of course, but is an obligation? I think the doctor has an obligation to be a really, really good doctor.
Yeah.
And I think a financial planner has an obligation to serve clients
Yeah.
and all the fiduciary stuff and be trustworthy and honest. And then
Hmm.
um and I would hope that we all want to leave the industry better. Is
Yeah.
that is that okay, or am I missing the point?
No, I think it's okay. Ironically, like I think I'm actually more negative on this obligation than you are. I guess for maybe slightly different reasoning. There is a part of me, I don't know, like I live in independent worlds. I'm very independent minded. So like the moment I used to tell me I have an obligation to do anything, like my
Right.
like the hackles
Right.
go up a little bit. But that aside, that's like me being snarky independent. Um the most fundamental concern that I have when I look at something like this is there's sort of an implication that the people we're saying this to are people who would not otherwise be making the hires.
Mm, mm,
Because look, there's some firms that just they're hiring because they're growing. They're hiring because they're trying to create career tracks because they want to serve 3x, 5x, 10x the clients in the future. And the only way you're going to do that is to add more advisors to your firm. And if you don't want to go hire experienced folks, you bring young people in and you train and develop them. So there's a version of this where like I'm growing and I need more advisor talent. So cool, go to and get it, and we'll create opportunities for young people to come in the profession. But the implication to me here is that we must be speaking to people who weren't otherwise going to be hiring. And
mm,
so when you get there, I start having problems with this for a couple of reasons. The first is if this is someone who A was not looking to grow so much that they needed more advisors, and B was not someone that was just like so naturally wired to say, even though I don't need a person, I'm just going to hire a person because I so want to like hire and train and develop people just because. You're basically talking about someone who does not have a primary interest in bringing in young people and teaching them how to be a financial advisor, which means if you force them to do that, I think it's going to end up being a pretty crappy job for the person who comes into that firm with a firm owner that kind of implicitly clearly didn't really want them to be there. Like this is not a welcome environment for nurturing the next generation of the profession to force people who don't have an interest in training and developing other advisors to say you have to train and develop the other advisor. Oh, and you have to do it entirely on your own dime. And their salary expectations are 55 to $75,000, maybe give or take a little, depending on geography and cost of living in the area. Like that's a lot. I mean, just like from a day to day, like what are you making this firm owner do? That's a lot to ask someone to do, both financially and time wise. for someone that probably does not have a natural inclination that way, because if they did, they likely would have already done it by now. I mean, there are many people I know who do these hires and will outright say, I don't really need this person for the future. I just want to create opportunities. Some of them have even made residency programs that by definition will have you leave after a few years and bring a new person in because they're not trying to grow a
Mm,
10-year successor. They're just trying to create opportunities because they want to. So more power to you if you want to do this and this is how you want to
sure.
contribute to and advance the profession. Like, I think it's a wonderful thing for the people that do it. But I not only have a problem about it suggesting that it's an obligation, because I just don't love the obligation word, Carl, for all the reasons that you said. To me, there's sort of this assumption of, well, if we could just force more advisors that didn't want to hire people, that young people would get great jobs. I don't think it's going to be a great job.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't think it's going to be a positive learning environment. I mean, if anything, I would actually worry that we increase the churn rate of the profession and we bring in promising young people and churn them out because their first job was in a firm that didn't really actually want them to have to be there
Y-
and kind of resented the obligation to teach and train them. And so, sure enough, they move on after a year or two because it's not a particularly positive experience.
Yeah. Is this a problem right now? Do people, I mean, how is it? I'm just disconnected from this enough to not know. Like, if you want to get into the profession right now, you've got to, you just finished up at UVU,
Yeah.
you want to be a financial planner. It's gotten a lot, my understanding, it's gotten a lot easier to find your way in versus some of the circuitous. I think I just used that word, routes that we
Is
had to
that
take.
is that like a problem word for you?
No, it's like it's
Okay.
impressive. Like
Okay.
Carl sketch guy just used the word circuitous.
Okay, so like we're over your like typical
We're way over,
count
like
for a word. Okay, got it.
way over. Like if my wife was around, she'd just be like, "Whoa, brother, that was
All right.
good." And that's what would happen. So all I'm saying is we used to come from all these different routes,
Yeah.
and now it seems like it's gotten much easier. Is it still really hard for somebody to find a job in the industry?
It's still pretty hard.
Yeah,
Uh
yeah.
well, it's still pretty hard for new people coming in. And I think indirectly speaking to the problem that Daniel is highlighting, uh there's a lot of demand for advisors with 7 to 15 years of experience.
Mm,
Maybe
mm,
down to 3 to 5 if you're like a really strong up and comer. Not a lot of firms want to hire people and develop them in the first 3 years.
mm,
Except some very, very large firms into what still often turn out to be mostly sales jobs
mm,
because it's very lucrative for them, even if you leave, because they keep your trails. So I do think this is a challenge right now, but it's a challenge in large part because it's certainly I think on the independent channel, like most that would like have the controlled decision to do this, like we went most of us went and hung our shingle because we just wanted to serve clients and give them financial advice and get paid for it, not to become teachers and trainers and people managers and talent developers. It's that's not the gig we signed up for, which I think is why what you're seeing is a lot of independent firms that really struggle to hire young people because no one in the firm knows how to train and develop someone.
mm,
Now, I'm not
mm,
trying to knock them, just this is showing up pretty clear across a lot of the industry. We don't have systems to train young people in the average small to mid-sized independent firm. We don't have the size, we don't have the staff resources, we don't have the tools and templates, we don't have the time, we don't have the scale. And I think that's challenging because I think those are the exact firms that Daniel's talking to here and raising the obligation question. And again, I look at it, I'm like, or maybe the reason they're not doing it is because they know they don't have the time nor capacity nor resources. And they're just saving someone the trouble of not having a crappy job with under training and insufficient resources that they're just going to leave in a year or two with a bitter
mm,
taste in
mm,
their mouths about the industry.
mhm. Yeah, how do we, just to turn this on its head a little bit, how do we um what have you seen in terms of the most successful initiatives to try and create these opportunities? not out of obligation, but I
Yeah.
mean, there's just been
So,
so many that I've heard about. I'm just like, man, that's
yeah.
awesome that
Well,
we
look,
can support.
when I think about this in numbers, look, it's like the numbers that it needs. I mean, I think the Cerulli number is something like 30 or 40% of advisors are supposed to retire in the next 10 years. It's literally something like 100,000 advisors. I don't think we can create that many jobs in the independent channel. Like, there aren't that many of us to
Right.
hire that many of them at a couple of years each to train and develop them.
Yeah.
If you look at how this happens in other professions like law and accounting, the bulk of the entry level jobs are created by the mega firms
Yeah.
that have entry level, kind of grindy, not so glorious, but you learn your frickin' trade jobs.
Yeah.
And you go do that for 3 to 5 years and you learn your profession, and they know how to do it in volume because they hire them in batches and they train them in batches and they put them through in cohorts, and they figured out the tasks that can be delegated down that still make it economical for the firm to do this and get some ROI. And then after you do that for 3 to 5 years, you go decide what you actually want to do with your career. And some of them stay there and like climb the ladder in big firms because that's their thing. And others go to a regional and others hang their shingle. And like you decide what the future of your career is going to be. And so like first and foremost, I feel like that's most likely the model for us, which means my expectations, it's more like the Schwabs and Fidelities and Vanguards of the world
Mhm.
that hire like 1,000 at a time that solve this, than one solo RIA at a time who doesn't have enough growth that they need to hire, but takes on a associate advisor just because. Like I think this gets solved more in large firms than in small to mid-sized firms, except all those firms that are just so on a growth track that they literally need to hire and do this uh because they need the talent pipeline for their own future client support needs. So I think part of it comes from large firms, and the
Mhm.
other I think it comes from our industry organizations. I mean,
Mhm.
it's the NAPFAs and FPAs of the world that try to create these systems and training programs to make it easier for young people to come in, or it's CFP board that, to their credit, is already doing some of this through their Center for Financial Planning to try to create some of those systems and structures and
Mhm.
show both small and large firms like how you start building career tracks to create these opportunities.
Yeah, I love that.
And
It's interesting.
don't make me hire a $70,000 person I didn't need. Like, maybe appeal to me to pay for a membership association I may or may not have been paying for in order to contribute back to my profession. But like, you can, we can do membership drives a little more effectively than you have to hire and full-time manage a person that you didn't even want in your firm.
Yeah. It is interesting to think about the big firms and other like they literally, like you literally go through in a batch.
Yeah.
Like there's no hiding it at all. My daughter's in private equity and distressed private equity. And yeah, like there's no, I mean, she happens to also be, in one of the most male dominated sections of finance.
Hmm.
And and there's no I mean, it's a grind. It's a
Yeah.
grind, right? And she's putting in her time and she's
Yeah.
learning a ton
I
and
mean,
yeah,
that's
medical's
what you
cool, right?
do when you're learning your profession. I
Residency.
mean, look, if you want to go all the way back to the old days, like the apprentice job for the blacksmith or whatever it was, like that was not a glamour job. That was
Right.
like carry lots of heavy and hot and unpleasant things for a lot of hours, but you get to learn and you get the experience. You get your proverbial Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours as quickly as you can, and then you figure out what your future is actually going to be. But
Yeah. Who have you seen, not necessarily who, but what does it look like on a smaller scale? So those like firms or small organizations that are trying to do their part because they feel not an obligation, but they feel a desire
yeah.
to do their part. What does it look like?
So I think the best model of what this looks like, I'll give a full shout out for Carolyn McClanahan, who has
Mm,
championed this for a number of years.
Yep.
She advocates for what effectively would be the financial advisor equivalent of a residency program,
Yeah. Love it.
where you come in a somewhat supervised environment and do a set list of things that support senior advisors, senior doctors that have actual patient slash client experience and interactions. And if you Google financial planning residency, Carolyn McClanahan, we have a whole article on kitces.com that she wrote for us about what this looks like. The key takeaways to it to me are, so the biggest takeaway to me of it is most of us who hire a younger advisor do it for some version of succession plan, take my clients in the future. And I
Mm.
think one of the challenges that comes from that is we make it really freaking high stakes. It basically means if you don't stay with my firm for like 10 to 15 years and take
Mm.
all these clients and then eventually buy me out at the end, this was a failure. And A, that's really high stakes. B, at best, it's kind of a crapshoot about whether the person that you're hiring today even actually really likes and wants to do that in 10 to 15 years when it's time. And C, it's even less likely when you're hiring a new person in the profession in their early 20s, because very few of us in our 20s actually have any idea what we want to do when we grow up. I'm in my 40s and I'm not sure what I want to do when I grow up. So I
I'm
change
in
it
my
every few years.
I'm in my 50s. I don't have
So
any idea.
so like the idea that you can magically pluck out the 23-year-old straight out of school who's going to be the one that stays with you to 10 to 15 years and takes over your client base is like barely better than throwing like darts blindly to hope that something works out. And like that's fine for those that want to try and pursue that path. But the challenge to me is we created this binary scenario where if the person doesn't stay forever, it wasn't a good deal and it wasn't a good hire. And to me, one of the powerful things that comes from the residency style models is you're not taking this person on so that maybe 7 years from now they'll be productive and 10 to 15 years from now they'll buy you out. You take this person on because the goal is in less than 3 to 6 months, they're doing useful, meaningful things that help the business today.
Mm.
Now, maybe not the level of like take on a bunch of my clients and give me capacity, but help me with my meeting notes, help me with my plan preparation, help me do these analyses, help me prep these reviews, help me report out these meeting notes, help me set up these agendas, things that save meaningful time immediately are somewhat tasky, which means the person's not going to want to do it forever, which is fine because they're not
Yeah.
supposed to
Yeah.
stay there forever. You finish a residency after 2 or 3 years and you leave, and a new person comes in.
Right.
Now, most of us don't want to do that because I don't get the value until 5 to 7 years out. So it would be a catastrophe if they left in 2 or 3 years. But I think that's like an artificial construct constraint we've kind of created for ourselves. I think
Yeah.
if we can shift the model to say, yes, there is a version of I'm going to get the young person, hope they stay with me forever. And if you can find your person, more power to you. I've seen a lot of failure stories and some really cool success stories. So awesome. But if you are one of these, like, you want to answer Daniel's obligatory call, or you're not treating his obligation, you're actually excited to take the
Yeah.
call and do this. I think the more meaningful opportunity is to stop trying to make these 7 to 15 year long-term advisor programs and just say, how do I create a meaningful opportunity where the firm gets value in 3 to 6 months and the person is done in 2 to 3 years? And
Right.
then as
And
a firm, I just go get the next one, which is not a big deal on turnover because I can make them valuable in a few months and then get a few years of meaningful value out of them. And frankly, if that's my model, like it means I can bring 3 to 4 young people into the profession over the next decade, not just one. So we literally help more people.
yeah.
It's more economically beneficial for the firm. I think it takes pressure off the firm owner that like you don't have to find the magic person who's going to be your mini me for the next
Yeah.
decade. Like
Yeah.
just find someone that can do this list of job responsibilities that would take some work off your plate. And you can be upfront of them. This is a residency program. It will end in 2 or 3 years. When you're done, you're going to go find a job that's not with me. So just setting that up now. I will write you really nice letters of recommendation if you're helpful. You'll have your CFP marks because you'll get your 2 year apprenticeship or 3 year experience work done. So you'll be much better positioned to get that job. And I'm
Yeah.
simply here to be a great first stepping stone in your journey.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that just simply because the main thing this has been a problem for so long of like bring the person on and then do I have to keep them forever and then they're going to take all my clients and it's going to be they're going to want to get paid like all of those stories that you hear. And I love the
Yeah.
idea of setting it up from the beginning of like, hey, and maybe you want to start your own firm. Like this like the
Yeah.
goal is you're leaving.
Yeah, you are going to leave.
Like
And
we're
like
just
it's
a
nothing
launching
negative for
pad.
you.
We're a
It's I
launching
don't
pad.
I don't have a seat for you in a long time. I don't want to create a seat for you in the long time, but I've got meaningful work that needs to be done today. You
Yeah.
will get bona fide experience doing it. It's not that complex, which means you can learn it quickly and you'll be gone before it gets all that boring.
Yeah.
Everybody wins.
Yeah. Yeah.
To me,
And
like that, just even for the firms, or especially for the firms that do want to do this, to me, that's kind of the biggest opportunity. I'll just call it the like, we need to maybe take it down a notch that not every hire has to be your career long successor. They could just be a good young person who does some helpful work for a few years and moves on. And it's okay to even set that expectation up front.
yeah. Yeah, and I would imagine like Caroline probably has gotten really good at matching, you know what I mean? Like those people coming
Yeah.
out of a program, a residency program like that are now 3 years with all the things and the experience. Like it's not, I would
Yep.
imagine that you can get pretty good at placing those people, even though you
Yep.
haven't taken on that obligation.
Yep.
It's very, very cool.
And so I've seen like smaller solo style practices do this. John Guyton in Minneapolis did this for
Mm,
many years. I've seen it in some larger firms as well. Elisa Bowie and Dave Yeski at Yeski Bowie do a version of this. They're a bit larger. Like it's become a bit of a career track for them. They get to see a lot of talent that comes through the residency program, and either they help them move on, or if they have grown to the point where they need to hire their next person, someone might get a job offer to stay after all.
yeah, yeah,
And it works from the firm. Like you train and develop people, you get meaningful value from them with the time that's there, and you get like 2 to 3 years to figure out who you might really want to try to keep on the bus for the longer term without any obligation to do so.
yeah. That's amazing. That feels, see, I think what is nice is we get to the same spot with
Yep.
a much different feeling.
Yeah.
You know, like and we don't need to run around clamoring about obligation, 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 but we can say, look, okay, let's think about some ways to make the industry better. And we all are going to do this in different ways. And one of them could be a residency program, right?
And maybe I still don't love the obligation angle literally, but maybe if we get to the point where we're more comfortable with residency style models that aren't a long-term obligation, it's just look, get some meaningful work from someone who just literally leverages you a little more and gets you delegate some tasks that you probably shouldn't be doing as the founder, firm owner, solo advisor anyways. Like maybe there's a few people that weren't interested in hiring that don't necessarily want Daniel's proverbial obligation. Now we're like impressing it upon him. I don't know that he's literally advocating it,
Sure. Yeah, of
but
course.
maybe that don't want Daniel's obligation, but would consider I can do a thing that I get value in a few months and then they move on after a few years. Like that's just literally good for the business if you delegate enough things that either you can grow a little more,
Yeah.
expand your personal capacity, or maybe just get a little bit more vacation because you delegated some more stuff.
Yeah. And I think it's important to tell Daniel that we love him.
And we love you, Daniel.
Thank you. We ended up using you almost as a metaphorical meme. So we know what you were asking. Thanks for the question.
Yes. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you,
Cheers.
Carl.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael.